to our first lesson in the Learning How to Crochet series. So for this first lesson, I thought I would start by teaching you the language that you will experience when trying to read different crochet patterns and also throughout these crochet lessons. I believe teaching you the language that you're going to experience is the perfect foundation for the lessons, and so let's get started. So the benefits with starting by learning the crochet language is that learning the language in patterns is the foundation that's needed to learn how to crochet. Without knowing the language that's used in crocheting, you're not going to be able to know what the pattern is requiring or what the person that's teaching you, such as myself, is asking for. Learning the language is essential for moving forward. The second benefit is that trying to learn how to crochet and actually do crocheting is difficult in itself. When adding the difficulty of not understanding the language that's using, it makes it very difficult to learn how to crochet in general. Hopefully this lesson will be really helpful to you. I also plan on having the links to the different cheat sheets that I will be using in this video included in the description of this video so that you can have those for your own use and refer back to them in the future as needed. So let's get started. First link that I want to show you is the link about the crochet language. This just shows the different abbreviations that you might experience when you're learning how to crochet. Here is the basics that you'll see. We have chain, slip stitch, single crochets, but there's a few in here that I want to highlight so that you understand what they are meaning. First one is down here, which is increase. The important thing to remember with increasing and decreasing is that you want to increase and decrease with the stitch that is being used throughout the pattern. So if this row in the pattern is using single crochets, then you're going to want to increase using single crochets. If it's using double crochets, you're going to want to increase using double crochets. So just make sure to follow what is being used currently in the pattern. The same thing goes with decreasing. Decreasing you'll either see as DEC for decrease or 2, then TOG, which stands for two together. Usually when it's using the 2 TOG, they'll have the abbreviation for what type of stitch they want in front of it. So for instance, it'll say SC 2 together, so single crochet 2 together. Another one that I want to highlight is the asterisk or parentheses, which when you see asterisks or parentheses, that's indicating that that portion of the pattern is going to be repeated throughout that row. Another example or another thing that I want to point out is when you see X and then a number, so an example is X3. This is saying times 3, which is saying the number of times that the portion within the asterisk or parentheses, like we just mentioned, will be repeated. Another couple that I want to mention are in the round, which in the round will usually be paired with this first one up here, which says magic circle or magic ring, which is how you start working in the round. So working in the round is typically used when making crochet animals or amigurumi, and the rounds can either be continuous or connected, and it should be mentioned in the pattern whether they're continuous or connected. I assume continuous unless mentioned otherwise. So evenly or across just stands for no increases or decreases. That just means, so if you're single crocheting, you're going to single crochet in each stitch all the way around. If you're double crocheting, you're going to double crochet in each stitch all the way around. The numbers at the end of the row are very helpful. These are going to, I highly suggest that you pay attention to the numbers at the end of the rows and that you count your stitches at the end of each row, because those numbers stand for how many stitches you should have and are really, really important for making sure that you are still on track with the pattern. Because there's nothing more frustrating than finding out that you're missing a stitch or missing even a few stitches, and then you have to take a bunch of rows out. So really important. That's something I highly suggest, especially for beginners, to pay attention to the numbers at the end of the rows and make sure you're counting your stitches. Another good one is round X through X, or example around 15 through 19, this just means that the instructions in this row will be repeated for each of those rows. And so if we have 15 through 19, that means that the instructions for this row is going to be repeated on rounds 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Alright, so now that we've gone through the crochet language or abbreviations that you're likely to see, let's take a look at a few examples of what patterns may look like. Alright, so the first example is one of my own patterns. It's for Pepper the Horse. Alright, so this is one of my own patterns called Pepper the Horse with holiday hats. So she's a cute little horse that comes with different hats for each holiday. So my pattern starts off with just a little list of abbreviations that will be used throughout the entire pattern. Alright, so here's the first part. So this portion is for the horse because this pattern comes with the instructions for not only the horse, but each of the holiday hats that you saw in the previous picture. If you are at all interested in this pattern, I will have the link for it in my description. It is in my Etsy shop for a purchase. So here we go. Here's a small little portion of this pattern just to show you how patterns might look. So I have it started with the head here, and you see the list of rows, and it starts out with 6 single crochets in the magic circle, and then this shows how many stitches you should now have, 6. So when I say increase with the asterisk, that means we're going to increase in each stitch around. So that means 2 single crochets in each stitch around, thus it makes 12 stitches. And then you can see row 4 where I say single crochet around, so that's no increases or decreases, so that's one row that would just be single crochet in each stitch. You can see down here where I use the X through X to indicate that this will be repeated for those rows, for rows 8 and 9. I also have mentioned over here that it'll be for 2 rows. So here's a decrease example. This is just an example, one example of how a pattern might look. Alright, so let's take a look at another example. So the second example here is just a small portion of a pattern that is for free. I don't have the link or anything. I just took a small portion of the pattern so that you could see an example of what a different pattern writing style might look like. So a couple key differences in this pattern is that instead of saying increase, it says 2 of the type of stitch in each stitch or in each single crochet. So that is just saying you're increasing around. Another example is that they use parentheses instead of using the asterisks for the part that is repeating, and she does mention around in each. Another part that I want to show you just as an example of how patterns might vary is this little part right here where it says 1 chain 3 space. So that is just saying that there's going to be 39 regular stitches and then 1 chain of 3 spaces. And that is because in the pattern here in this row you chained 3 and then slip stitched into the first stitch. So it's always useful to have that little cheat sheet on you so you can understand exactly what those type of random things that will pop up are going to stand for. It's also really important that you just try to read through the pattern first. That's always my first step when I'm using somebody else's pattern, is I read through all of it from top to bottom just to make sure that I can understand what it's asking for, so that I don't start making it and then get to a step that I don't understand and then just have wasted that much time on making something that I don't know how to finish. Alright, so let's get to another example. This third example is an example of a pattern that I actually made at one point, and it was quite confusing just because of the way it was written. And not like there's anything wrong with the way it was written, but as you can see, sometimes they would use the number like single crochet 9, so sometimes they would use that. Sometimes they would just go increase, 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 or single crochet, increase, instead of just saying when the pattern repeats and when it doesn't. There's nothing wrong with writing a pattern this way, it's just, in my experience, is a little bit more difficult for beginners to understand, and this is just another example of how patterns might vary and why it's important to read a pattern before you start just crocheting it. Alright, so those are the 3 examples of different crochet patterns and how they might vary, and just give you a little experience of what they might look like. Now let's start talking about crochet diagrams. How to read crochet diagrams is something that I personally think is lacking in the crochet community, and that's really unfortunate because this is usually what's used when crocheting things such as clothing. So let's take a look at the cheat sheet that I made for reading crochet diagrams. So here's the cheat sheet for the crochet diagrams. This is a really basic cheat sheet that I made, and I'm more than willing to make a advanced version of this sheet, so please let me know if you're interested in that in the comment section below. But this version just shows the basics of what you might come across in different crochet diagram patterns. As you can see, they're shown by images or by pictures, such as an open oval or circle would be a chain, a filled in circle would be a slip stitch. The X or plus sign can vary once again based on pattern and who's writing it. Is either an X or a plus is a single crochet. We have a T as a half double crochet, a T with a little dash under it is a double, 2 dashes would be a treble. Something I want to point out here is how to indicate back loop only or front loop only. So to indicate back loop only or front loop only is actually done by this part on the bottom here. So back loop only would be a straight line, and front loop only would be this little U. And this can be used with any of the stitches indicated above. So you can have a T here with a straight line or a loop under it, and that would mean it's a half double crochet in the front loop or the back loop only. So the indicators of that, as I mentioned before, is just a straight line or the U line. And then the same thing is with decreases and increases. You can decrease or increase using any type of stitch. However, it's usually indicated the same way, where the decreases look like they're coming from 2 stitches and coming together at the top to make 1 stitch, while increases are the exact opposite, and it's 2 different stitches coming out of 1 stitch. I have indicated a double crochet here, but this could also be used with a half double crochet or a treble crochet. So that is the basics of the crochet diagrams. And so let's get into some examples of what these patterns might look like. Alright, so diagram 1 example. So this is an example of a crochet diagram. As you can see, there's some of the stitches that we talked about, such as the chains. You can see some double crochets. There's some that are not mentioned in my crochet diagram, such as a puff stitch. You can see the pluses in here, which are the single crochets. Another thing I want to point out is these numbers that are in circles. I have them highlighted here in red. This number 1 and then this number 24. So this number 1 is indicating that this is the first round, and this number 24 is indicating how many stitches should be in this first round. So the first round should have 24 stitches. So this is round 2, then round 3, round 4, and round 5. So let's look at another diagram example. This example is worked in rows instead of in the round like the previous example was. First thing I want to point out here is, again, here's the row counters. So here's 1, 2, and 3. And then they kind of skip a couple rows, and then it's 18, 19, 20, and 21. Again, you can see the circles. These are circles instead of ovals, but it's still the same thing. They're not filled in, so those would be chains. Then you see these with just 1 cross here is going to be the double crochet, and then the 2 ticks here would be the treble crochet. This is just another example of a crochet pattern. You can see some increases here, and this one does not have anywhere where it states how many stitches are supposed to be in each row, because this is probably used for a clothing article. The pattern would just repeat from here, and it would go on if you wanted to make it bigger or smaller. So you could just imagine this entire diagram pasted right next to it over here. On the bottom here is another thing I want to point out, which is a sizing indicator. With clothing, you want to make sure that your stitches are turning out to be the right size, because if they're not, then you're going to come out with clothes that are either way too big or way too small. That area, and it will have a measurement underneath, it kind of got cut off, but that area measured this much in length. Alright, so those are the diagram examples, and that is the end of our first crochet video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's helpful for you going forward. I just wanted to start off with this. I thought it'd be a really good basics foundation lesson for you guys before we get started and dive into actually crocheting in our next video. I'm really excited. I hope you are too. Like I said before, the links to the different cheat sheets that I used today, and also the link for the Pepper the Horse pattern, will be included in the description of this video. If you haven't already, please make sure to click the thumbs up and like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to me so you don't miss our future crochet lessons. If you haven't already, check me out on my other social media sites. My Facebook is Just the Right Stitch. I have an Instagram at just_the_right_stitch, and then the link to my Etsy shop. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.